Hi, everybody. Today's Monday, March 9th, 2026, and our dear friend John Kiriakou is here with us. Welcome back, John.
Thank you, Nima. It's good to see you again.
John, let me start with the war between the United States and Iran. It started with the assassination of the supreme leader of Iran, together with one of the most tragic events so far, which was the hit, the attack on a primary school in Iran. Mostly girls, schoolgirls, were killed by the attack. And Donald Trump, he said he was asked if it was the United States that did this attack. Here is what Donald Trump said.
States bomb a girls' elementary school in southern Iran on the first day of the war and kill 175 people?
In my opinion, and based on what I've seen, that was done by Iran.
Is that true, Mr. Higson? It was Iran who did that?
We're certainly investigating.
Still
But
investigating?
the only side that targets civilians is Iran.
We think it was done. We think it was done by Iran
Can you give us an
because they're very inaccurate, as you know, with their munitions. They have no accuracy whatsoever. It was done by Iran.
John, later on, there are videos released by the Iranian media. The Mehr News is an outlet in Iran. It shows the exact moment of the hitting of that building. Here is the footage. Yeah. Then they slow down the frame. It shows that it was most probably a Tomahawk missile which hit the building. When it comes to such a huge mistake or such a huge problem with these targets, or many people would say, why would someone do that? And what is the main goal of these sort of attacks? You can hit the military targets, all of these, but when it comes to the kids, what is the main point? What is your understanding of what has happened?
First, I want to correct something that Donald Trump said. The Israelis almost exclusively target civilians. It's not that Iran targets civilians, it's Israel that targets civilians. And there are tens of thousands, more than 100,000 dead in Gaza to prove exactly that. Listen, as an American, I want to believe that this was a terrible mistake, but my brain won't allow me to believe that. My brain wants me to believe that either we did this on purpose or the Israelis did it on purpose. It's to traumatize the Iranian people, to take the fight right out of them. I was talking about this on a podcast a couple of days ago, and I said the problem that we're already facing as a country here in the United States is that Donald Trump genuinely believed that as soon as we launched the first missile, the Iranians would be dancing in the streets and the government would fall like a house of cards and everybody would live happily ever after and he would win the Nobel Peace Prize and the Israelis would forever be grateful for our actions. But he was the only person that believed that. Anybody who follows these issues, anybody could have told him, we would not be seen as liberators. We would be seen as invaders and occupiers. Nima, I happened to be in Los Angeles the last couple of days until last night. And the Southern California media keep replaying this demonstration with 200 or 300 Iranian Americans, mostly Jewish, which is quite common in Southern California, dancing in the streets, waving the Shah's flag, waving the Israeli flag. And then our friend Max Blumenthal released a video of one of his journalists interviewing some of these pro-Shah, pro-Israel demonstrators, Iranian American demonstrators, and asking them specifically about the girls that were killed in this strike. And like ghouls, like demons, They say, oh, no, that's okay. We're okay with that because, greater good. In the end, it's all going to be for the best. Yeah, it's a shame maybe that these girls were killed, but probably the Iranians did it. But we're okay with it. It's okay to kill children. On the one hand, that is so sick that I don't even have words for it. On the other hand, if you are Benjamin Netanyahu or Donald Trump or Pete Hegseth or Marco Rubio or Itamar Ben-Gvir or any of these other crazy people that are involved, embrace what you believe in. If you're so certain that you're right, embrace it and say, yes, we killed those children. Yes, and we don't apologize. And we're going to kill more children. Own it. At least be honest about it. And they're not even being honest.
John, since the war started, we've seen Iran started with attacking Persian Gulf Arab states and mostly American bases in those states. And how did you find the way that the Iranian military started the war and the United States, first United States together with Israel struck Iran, and then they came in and strike on Iran. Then we see Iranian attack on Persian, mostly the Persian Gulf Arab states with the American bases. You've been to the region, you know what's going on there. What was the strategy on the part of Iranians with the counteroffensive, if we can put it this way?
I think this was actually a very sophisticated strategy. I was in the Persian Gulf 2 weeks ago. I spent a week in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and then 2 weeks before that, I spent a week in Kuwait. And this was all anybody wanted to talk about. They wanted to know, are the Americans going to attack? And I said, I hate to say it, but I think yes. I said, if there was one thing that I learned in my years at the CIA, it was that if you really want to understand what American military strategy is, watch the movement of American naval vessels. If the United States sends an aircraft carrier with 11 or 12 associated ships, that's an aircraft carrier strike force or an aircraft carrier battle group, or 2 of them, it's because we're serious about attacking. So I told my friends and contacts in the Persian Gulf that, yes, I believe the United States would attack. And they did. Now, the Iranian response has been remarkable. First of all, the Iranians are outgunned. They know they're outgunned. They just don't have the sophisticated, for the most part, hypersonics aside, they don't have the sophisticated technology that the United States and Israel have. But they have these cheap, plentiful, reliable suicide drones. Drones where you don't launch a missile from them. You just strap explosives to them and just crash them into the target. And of course, being drones, you operate them remotely. Well, they're very cheap. You can build one of these for $5,000 or $6,000, $10,000 for a really good one that can go a long distance, like all the way to Israel. It's the future of warfare. It's something that the United States has not fully come to appreciate and understand, but the Iranians do. And so rather than just heave a rocket at Dubai, which admittedly they've done, and they've hit, a couple of hotels, an apartment building, for the most part, they've guided these drones into more sensitive targets. U.S. military bases, U.S. Air Force Base outside of Doha, the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet in Manama, the U.S. Army base in Kuwait, and most importantly, oil facilities in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. So again, Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, they all believe that as soon as we start hitting Iran, the whole country is just going to collapse. And it didn't. And then keep this in mind. Trump is on right now as we're speaking, and he just said the war could be over soon because it's very complete already. Whatever that means. He just said that. It'll be over soon because it's very complete already. Okay. So with that interruption, keep this in mind. For the United States and Israel to win, they have to completely topple the Iranian government and remove all of their leaders. And we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people that have to be removed. And when I say removed, I mean likely killed. And then they have to install a pro-American, pro-Israeli government in its place. That is virtually impossible, number one. But number two, for the Iranians to win, all they have to do is survive. That's it. If they can just survive this, they win, Israel and the United States lose. And I think that we're very quickly coming to that. Isn't that funny? This Trump press conference lasted about 60 seconds. He just came to the podium to say, the war could be over soon. It's very complete.
Yeah. John, I think what one of the outcomes of this conflict, of this war, it's a war,
Yes,
would be how this war can change the face of the Middle East, the face of, the policies makers in the Middle East. Because before we had the conflict in Gaza, majority of the people, the public opinion was against Israel, but the politicians, mostly in the Arab states, were somehow trying to play both sides.
yes,
But right now with the war in Iran, they see how fragile, how vulnerable they are against a country that can fire back, that can hit
yes,
them. And we're not talking about it's Iran and Saudi Arabia. Comparing the defense budget of these two countries, Iran is not even comparable to what Saudi Arabia has, 10 times the defense budget of Iran, but they're not capable of defending themselves. This is a huge fragility within a society, that they can buy the arms, but they cannot defend themselves. That's why they need the American base in their country. What is the future for these American bases? Because they were calling Putin, asking him to do something about what is going on. And we learned from Lavrov, from his latest press conference, he said, did you condemn what Israel and America is doing against Iran? So why are you expecting we do something about it? You bought all, you are the main reason of this war happening. What is your understanding of the calculation of these Arab states, the leaders, those decision makers in these countries?
I have to say, they must be very, very disappointed in themselves and very disappointed in the wisdom of this policy, because the whole reason for having the United States in the Persian Gulf in such significant numbers after the liberation of Kuwait in 1991 was so that something like this wouldn't happen, right? If you've got the world's largest Air Force base for the Americans, if you have the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet for the Americans, if you have multiple Army bases with 50,000 ground troops for the Americans, and then the Americans can't stop a $5,000 drone from crashing into your luxury hotel or into their own bases. I remember in the days after the 9/11 attacks, President Putin said to President Bush that he was shocked that the Pentagon didn't have any surface-to-air missiles to protect it. Well, guess what? It's almost 25 years later, and we don't have surface-to-air missiles to protect much of anything that we have. So here we are in the Persian Gulf and in an active war zone with bases that have been there for 2.5 decades, 3.5 decades, and we can't even protect them against a $5,000 drone. So the United States is going to have to come up with a serious reevaluation of its military position, its defensive military position, and the countries of the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf are going to have to reassess just how much value added the U.S. military provides if the U.S. can't even protect itself.
most of the people who voted for Donald Trump, he said he's anti-globalist. All of these
Yeah.
policies, the new policies are coming to Washington. We're going to have some sort of change in Washington. So far from what we've seen in Venezuela, in Syria, right now with the war in Iran, do you recognize Donald Trump
No,
as against who is Donald
I
Trump
don't know who
today?
this man is. Yeah, I don't know who this man is. Well, you know what? I can tell you who he is. He is a man who has been influenced heavily by Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, frankly. I mean, the conventional wisdom was that Hegseth was an idiot. And maybe he was underestimated. Maybe he's not an idiot. Maybe he's just a typical John McCain neoconservative. Marco Rubio certainly is. He's a Cold Warrior, anti-communist, anti-Cuba, pro-military Cold Warrior. And one of the big complaints that people have had about Donald Trump over the course of years was that Trump tended to parrot back what the last person that he spoke to told him. And when Marco Rubio is both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, and you're speaking to him every day, and you're speaking to Pete Hegseth every day, and the person that you named chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you named because you know of his complete loyalty to you, then you're going to essentially turn into John McCain. And I think that's what's happened.
Yeah. John, do you think, you've just mentioned that Donald Trump said we have completed whatever he had in his mind, but are we in a war of attrition? Are we in some sort of war? Because on the part of Iranians, when we talk with them, they say that they're prepared for at least, one of the commanders today said, with at least 8 years, because they have this long history of war against Iraq. They know what is that. The economy of Iran has entered in this week. They are getting back to the same policies, considering the economy that they had during the Iran-Iraq war, just to subsidize everything, helping the people receiving the basics. And it seems that Iran doesn't feel that this is the end for the conflict. They have to continue the conflict. They don't see a reliable adversary on the other side to talk with, to negotiate with. This is one of the basic problems with the United States. We've learned today from one of Iranian official, Kharazi, one of the main, officials, one of the main advisors to the supreme leader of Iran. He said that the negotiation is not the goal anymore for Iran. We are going to bring some sort of problem to the global economy that the whole countries, all countries understand that there has to be a solution, a permanent solution to what's going on. Because negotiation, 2 times Iran tried to negotiate with the United States. Both times they have failed because the United States attacked them while negotiating.
I think that's right. The United States is not a reliable negotiating partner. It's just not. We pretend to negotiate, and then in the midst of the negotiations, we just launch military attacks. We've done that more than once. We've done that more than once in the past, 9 months. So yeah, the United States is not a reliable negotiating partner. The Iranians really could inflict serious harm on the global economy by closing the strait. It's not a permanent hurt because eventually pipelines are going to be built across Saudi Arabia and countries are going to figure out, excuse me, how to get around it eventually. But for a period of time, it could be a serious problem for the global economy. You mentioned the Iran-Iraq war, and I think that's very important, Ima, because this is something that Americans don't understand. First of all, most Americans have never heard of the Iran-Iraq war. And even the ones that remember the Iran-Iraq war have probably forgotten just how bravely Iranians fought. It was the Iranians that were the victims of aggression. It was Iraqi aggression. And it wasn't just that the Iraqis were aggressors. The Iraqis were electrifying the swamps to electrocute Iranian soldiers in southern Iraq or along the Shatt al-Arab. It was the use of chemical weapons against Iranians and against the Kurds in the north of Iraq. And the Iranians still couldn't be defeated. So that's why I said a few minutes ago that the United States and Israel to actually declare victory would need an unequivocal, clear-cut victory where Israel opens an embassy in Tehran and everybody, is friends. It's never, ever going to happen. And instead, I think what's going to happen is the Iranians are going to prove to be far more resilient than the West gave them credit for being. And they're going to fight back and bog the West down. And in the end, the West is going to have to withdraw, like the U.S. did from Iraq, like the U.S. did from Afghanistan and Somalia and Libya and Syria and all these other places where things have gone wrong.
John, what the Trump administration, the United States under the Trump administration is trying to do reminds me of what has happened in 1953 against Mohammad Mossadegh. He was the, democratically elected prime minister of Iran. There was a coup d'etat by the CIA and MI6. And do you think the same policies that eventually led to the collapse of the British Empire are the serious problems that the American empire is dealing with? Are they suffering from the same sort of, policies, the same sort of strategies?
I'm glad you brought that up, actually. I think the answer is a clear yes. Nima, the U.S. defense budget is untenable. The U.S. defense budget now is $1 trillion. It is bigger than the next now 9 largest countries combined. And in the meantime, here in the United States, we have third world level airports. Our hospitals are outdated. Our roads are in terrible condition. Our bridges are falling into the rivers below them. Why do the Chinese have bullet trains that go 500 kilometers an hour? Why don't we have bullet trains? Because we spend all of our money on weapons. Donald Trump said as recently as a year ago that he wanted to cut the federal budget by 50%, the Pentagon budget by 50%. I celebrated. I actually wrote an op-ed about it. And then he just completely changed his mind, did a 180 and said he wants to spend an additional $500 billion. Well, we're only a few years away from the interest payments on the national debt being the number one biggest expenditure in government. We can't keep doing this. We don't have the money. We've mortgaged future generations. And for what? We have nothing to show for it. So I don't think this is tenable. And at the same time, another thing is the fact that Iran is a member of BRICS. Eventually, not tomorrow, but eventually there's going to be a unified currency. And when that happens, it's going to pose a significant, serious challenge to the international domination of the dollar, especially the petrodollar. And that's going to be the beginning of the end for the U.S. empire.
John, how do you describe the relationship between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump today? Because Donald Trump is simply begging the president of Israel to pardon Benjamin Netanyahu. Why is that? What does Benjamin Netanyahu have on Donald Trump? That he tries so hard every time. He tries to do everything Benjamin Netanyahu is asking for.
I think what it is that Jewish Americans have such a financial hold over American elections that if you want to run for office in this country, you have to be not just Zionist, but you have to be an unquestioning, down the line, 100% Zionist. And we know that Donald Trump, in his 3 different campaigns for president, received hundreds of millions of dollars from Miriam Adelson, for example, and Sheldon Adelson before her. It was Sheldon Adelson who paid out of his pocket to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It was Sheldon Adelson who sent his private jet to take the traitor Jonathan Pollard from his prison to Israel, where he promptly got off the plane, kissed the ground, was met by Benjamin Netanyahu, and then advocated Jewish Americans using violence against the American government. I feel like we're practically occupied. Our politics are occupied here because of the role of money in our elections. And I think that's why Donald Trump is so under the spell of Benjamin Netanyahu. It's not necessarily that it's Netanyahu personally. It's those rich American Jewish oligarchs with their checkbooks out telling Trump, look, if it's worth it for you, I'll give you $100 million, but you have to do what I say when it comes to Israel. And I think that's what we've seen.
How do you see the war continuing? And is that going to be because many people are arguing that this could get nuclear. What are the conditions under which you feel that war can get nuclear? And what would be the objective of that sort of attack?
I hate to even speak these words, Nima, but I think that there is a possibility that it could go nuclear. It would be, of course, on the part of the Israelis. Independent analysts believe that the Israelis have between 80 and 200 nuclear weapons. The Israelis don't deny, they just refuse to comment on whether or not they have a program. The Israelis are not signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So nobody's doing inspections, for example, of Israeli nuclear sites. But they've had nuclear weapons since the 1950s. I think that if an Iranian military if an Iranian military victory were increasingly clear, and if the Iranians were successful in destabilizing the Arab countries on the peninsula side of the Persian Gulf, or if the Iranians posed a genuine threat, military threat to Israel, I could see the situation going nuclear. Yes.
And what would be the outcome? Let's assume that they're going to use a nuke on Iran, or 2, 5. So how is that going to help Israel?
It doesn't. I think it starts World War III. But I think for the Israelis, they've calculated that chaos is to their benefit. I don't think they, for example, have any real thoughts of defeating Hezbollah, for example. But they can turn Lebanon into a place of chaos. Chaos is good if you're Israeli. I think that their calculation is if they can turn Iran into Libya, that's to their benefit, because then the Iranian people are going to be fighting each other. Or they're going to be more worried about where to find food or water or medical care than they're going to be about fighting Israel. So chaos is to Israel's benefit.
One of the most interesting, moves on the part of the United States today is invading Iran underground. And they're talking about using Kurdish, groups in Iraqi Kurdistan and then bringing them down. Today we've learned from Erdogan, Turkey. He said that these people are not going to do that because they know they're smarter. They're smarter than being used by the United States in that direction. Is that a warning, in your opinion, on the part of Erdogan? Because there is not just a threat against Iran; it's going to be a threat against Turkey, Iraq, but after all, John, when it comes to Iran, when I was in Iran, I was in Iran for 40 days. I talked each and every aspects of the war. If it happens, what would you do? They're not, when you talk with officials, they're not saying, the way it is, but they're giving you some sort of, understanding of what would happen. They said that there is no possibility of the ground invasion in Iran because they're going to be, if the United States decides to do it, they saw this is not going to happen by the United States. It's going to be like the way that Donald Trump is trying to do by Kurdish people, these people. And they said that they're not going to do anything. They're not worried about. This is the last thing to be worried about. What is your understanding of that?
I think I have a couple of thoughts. First, I think Donald Trump would have to be clinically insane to put U.S. troops on the ground in Iran. That would be a death wish. And I can't believe that anybody in any position of authority in the American government wants to see that happen. That just is crazy to me. Like, did we learn no lesson at all in Afghanistan and Iraq? I can't imagine it happening. With that said, I would take that Kurdish argument far more seriously if it had come out of the mouth of somebody other than Erdogan. Erdogan hates all Kurds, and this is something that he's always been wrong about. Erdogan pretends that the Kurds are a monolith, that Iran's Kurds are the same as Iraq's, they're the same as Turkey's, they're the same as Syria's. That's just not true. There are different cultures, there are different dialects, and vastly different politics. I remember when we were getting ready to attack Iraq in 2002, 2003, Erdogan hated that we were working with Iraq's Kurds. He hated it. Well, of course we were working with Iraq's Kurds. They were going to provide much of the fight against Saddam Hussein, which they did. Well, it stands to reason that if you don't want to put your own boots on the ground, that what you might want to do is convince Iran's Kurds to attack, to make a feint toward Tehran. They would never make it to Tehran, of course, but at least make a move to make it look like they're moving toward Tehran, to draw out the IRGC so that Israel and the United States could hit the IRGC. I can't wrap my brain around American boots on the ground in Iran. It makes no sense. But I could definitely see the United States talking or tricking Iran's Kurds into making a move.
Actually, there was they invited on Fox News the Patriot Union of Kurdistan leader, Talabani, on Fox News. He was asked about, using the Kurdish people to do some sort of invasion in Iran. Here is what he said, John.
Difficult days ahead. The president is suggesting that he would only accept unconditional surrender, in his words, to a reporter. So you don't see that right now, that this is on the cusp of happening?
I don't, sir. No, I don't see that right now. I think that the regime has been planning for this for 45 years, and you can expect a fierce resistance. The definition of regime change is important. What is the definition of regime change? And is there an off-ramp? Because some could argue that most mission parameters have been achieved. So is there an off-ramp where now perhaps we can try to resolve this diplomatically?
Yeah, I think that from the administration, at least listening to them, taking out the ballistic missile capability, making sure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon, was the original objective going in.
Exactly.
The Israelis clearly are more wanting specific regime change to get a different leader in place that the U.S. and Israel can work with.
I understand that. And I think that, Mr. Baer, the conditions, I keep hearing the comparisons to 2003. I think the conditions are very different to 2003. In 2003, there was legitimate, well-known, respected opposition to Saddam among the Shiites, among the Kurds, and don't really see that in Iran now. There isn't a standard, a symbol for people to follow, and that will make it very difficult. Troops on the ground with a country the size of Western Europe, not sure if that's feasible either, but there are many options, and I think the US administration is wise enough to modify their position as the battle changes and as the battlefield changes.
Yeah.
Bafal Talabani Listen, Buffalo Talabani is an important guy, and he has been around for a long time. He and his family, and they really understand the situation on the ground.
You mean that his party, John? He's from Iran. He's from Iraq.
He's from Iraq. His father was Jalal Talabani. He was the founder of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan and became president of Iraq after Saddam's execution. So there were two primary Kurdish parties in northern Iraq: the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan and the KDP, the Kurdish Democratic Party. So it was Jalal Talabani and Masoud Barzani. They were rivals, but they basically worked together. And now that Iraq is, free and independent, they have autonomy for the Kurdish people in the Kurdish areas of the north.
Yeah. One of the things that was used, the terms that Donald Trump loves to use, is unconditional surrender.
Yeah.
Pete Hegseth was asked in his latest interview on 60 Minutes, he was asked, what does that mean? He said that it means we are fighting to win. What does it mean to you, John? We're fighting to win. What?
Only an old man would say something like that, or somebody whose mentality is that of an old man. What Donald Trump is talking about when he says unconditional surrender is sitting across a table from whoever happens to be the leader of Iran at any given time and forcing them to sign articles of surrender, just like we did to the Japanese at the end of World War II, or just as we did to the Germans at the end of World War II. That's not real life anymore. That's not the way the world works anymore. There won't be any more scenarios where all the generals from the American side are here, all the generals from the Iranian side are here. The Iranian generals take out their guns and hand the guns to the Americans to signify surrender. They put the contract in front of the Iranians, and the Iranians sign the contract saying, we surrender, the Americans are in charge now. That will never, ever happen. So when Pete Hegseth says unconditional surrender, I genuinely believe, Nima, that he doesn't have any idea what he's talking about. He genuinely doesn't know what he's supposed to say when somebody says, what does that mean? What does that term mean? He doesn't know.
Yeah. John, what was the understanding of the Trump administration? What is the understanding that they have removed the supreme leader of Iran and his son right now is the supreme leader of Iran?
Yeah, Nima,
do they have any understanding? Because before all of this sadness, all of this chaos happening, we were talking about it. What is the point of killing the supreme leader of Iran? And they've done that. And right now, what was the outcome? Is there anybody asking Donald Trump this question?
No, nobody's asking him. But many of us can speculate. Donald Trump, again, he truly believed that if he killed Ayatollah Khamenei, that the whole government would just fall apart. Within 24 or 48 hours, Iranians would take to the streets chanting USA, USA, and everybody would live happily ever after. I was on a podcast last week, and I likened this to killing the Pope. If you kill the Pope, you're not going to bring down global Catholicism. They just choose a new Pope. Well, if you kill the supreme leader, they just choose a new supreme leader. That's all. He was 86. He wasn't going to live forever. There had already been discussion about who would rise through the ranks to take the position after he departed the scene. There was never any possibility that Iran would just collapse because you killed an 86-year-old man.
Yeah, but it seems that, John, this is the failure on the part of the intelligence who are giving Donald Trump this sort of, or
That's
it's,
a good question. Listen, after 15 years in the CIA, either working on Iran or adjacent to Iran, I spent most of my career on Iraq, but you can't do Iraq without doing Iran. I can tell you that at the CIA, they have a very deep understanding of Iran and Iranian politics and Iranian history. It's a neoconservative understanding. So at the end of the day, it's flawed. But I'm confident that Donald Trump's position that Iran would fall apart did not come from the CIA. With that said, he has so politicized analysis from the CIA. It is possible that CIA analysts were afraid to tell the truth because they didn't want to lose their jobs and be fired if he didn't like the analysis.
you mean that he was receiving the intelligence from Mossad instead of receiving from CIA?
100%. 100% yes. He was receiving intelligence from Mossad. Yes. I don't think it was any kind of accident that Netanyahu came here 7 times in 11 months. That's a long trip. That's like an 11-hour trip. And he did it 7 times in 11 months. Yeah.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. John, it was a great pleasure to talk to you today.
Pleasure's always mine. It's good to see you again.
You too. John, are you gonna, I think you mentioned that Donald Trump is still talking. He just wrap it up, or he's just...
Oh no. He spoke for like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
He came out and said, we're launching new strikes right now. The war's almost over, and we've just about won everything.
Yeah.
See, but that's also a very Donald Trump thing to do. Just declare victory and go home.
Yeah. Let's see what would happen. Yeah. It's strange. It's strange. Yeah. See you soon, John. Thank you.
Good to see you, Nima. All the best.
See you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.